My name is Joram van Klaveren.
I was born on January 23rd, 1979 in Amsterdam.
I grew up in a pretty regular family. A father, a mother, a brother, and a younger sister.
I was born and raised in Amsterdam in a practicing Protestant family.
After finishing high school, I studied comparative religion. For several years, I worked as a teacher.
Over time, many questions began to arise in my life, especially when thinking deeply about Islam.
I later became involved in public life and social debates in the Netherlands. At one point, I decided to write a critical book about Islam.
But that book became a search for God.
And that journey ended with me becoming a Muslim.
Before I was a Muslim, I was a Protestant Christian from the Reformed Church. We read from the Bible. We all got biblical names. We were all baptized. We went to church. We were pretty Christian in that way. In that sense, of course, I believe that there's a creator. I believe in heaven, hell. I believe in angels and revelations. And of course, what separates the Christians from the Muslims is that I believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and, in a more philosophical way, I believed he was God himself. Of course, I believed in the resurrection and crucifixion of Christ, and I believed in the atonement. But because the Trinity is a very complex concept, whether you believe it or not, it's still very complex. Because if there is a God, in the Bible, it says God is eternal. But if you are eternal and at the same time you die, you cannot be eternal and immortal at the same time. So it was something when I was a little older, 16. 17, I started questioning things like that. It's not very logical. I've talked to many priests, preachers, even rabbis, and the answers I got weren't very satisfying. That made it, for me, kind of complex. And in the end, I had some doubts about stuff like this. But I said, well, I set it aside, and I thought like a judge. I just believe it. And perhaps I'm not smart enough to get the whole picture. And I still believed in God. I still believe that. Jesus was a very important person. I believe he was the Son of God. But how it exactly was, I left it for what it was. After high school, I went to a university and I did comparative religion. And the remarkable thing, I think, was that the first day of me going to college was September 11th, 2001. I already thought, okay, these Muslim guys are kind of crazy and this religion isn't the truth. Then, a few years later, was this guy in the Netherlands, Theo van Gogh. He was a famous filmmaker, and he was killed in the street. He was shot. And they tried to slit his throat, and they put a knife in his stomach with a letter on it for another girl, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And it said, "You are next." So it strengthened my anti-Islam feelings in such a way that I thought, well, I have to become politically active to do something and stop this evil or harming our country. I started politics because of Islam. And that really had to do with Islam. That was the reason that I wanted to write a book to explain to people why Islam was a danger for the world. When I was writing my book, like I said earlier, the questions, the doubts I had about Christianity popped up again. And that was about truth, of course, because I was a believing Christian guy. And the Christian questions I had in the end were answered in an Islamic way. Because, of course, when I started writing the book, a lot of people think that it was a political book. But it wasn't so much a political book. It was a religious book because I wanted to show people why Islam was a danger as a religion. And I wrote it from a Christian perspective. So, in the beginning, I made a comparison between the Christian concept of God and the Islamic concept. So I start comparing it. But because I had these doubts about the Trinity, and I saw, to hide the oneness of God in Islam, that sounds a little bit more logical. And then I thought to myself, well, I reread the Bible to see it, to refresh myself, to see, okay, why isn't the concept of Islam the Tawhid concept isn't? The Christian concept. But when I was reading the Old Testament, and I saw what the Old Testament prophets said, there was one God, one God, one God. And then I thought, okay, I'll look only at the words of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And then there's this story in the New Testament where a guy comes to Jesus and he asks him, what is the most important thing in life? How can I gain paradise? And he said, there are two things, he says. Hear, O Israel, hear, your God is one. Treat your neighbor as you want to be treated yourself. So I thought, well, even Jesus Christ is saying, hear, O Israel, your God is one. So I thought, well, this whole Muslim concept of God sounds more logical. And it's the same concept that I find in the Old and the New Testament. And I know Christianity as a religion teaches something else. But it isn't the concept of God that I find in the Bible. So after weeks and weeks of study, reading, rereading all kinds of books, I thought to myself, okay, perhaps this oneness of God is something that is true. So that's how it started. Because I was kind of shocked, I started writing to several authorities on these religious matters. And one of the guys that I wrote to was Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and he's a professor from Cambridge University. But in a way, it was kind of strange, of course. Because I was a politician back then still. I was writing an anti-Islam book with an anti-Islam purpose, and I'm asking this Muslim professor from another country, can you help me? So I told him I'm writing a book. I have a lot of questions, so I was very plain. Why I thought Islam is promoting terrorism. Why it was anti-woman. Why it's anti-Christian, anti-whatever. And after I think 6 weeks, he sent me a very extensive email. And he started explaining. Directly answered a lot of my questions. But he also told me, you have to read this article. Read this book. Read that book. Ask this person. So he was very extensive in his way of explaining. But in the end, after I read all these books and articles and made a comparison between prophets from the Old Testament with Prophet Muhammad, I had no arguments anymore to say. They are prophets and he is not. And I thought to myself, well, if I accept Moses on these grounds and I cannot accept the prophet, then there is something else. So I thought, why don't I think he is a prophet? And I thought that perhaps because he had many wives. But then again, when you look at Solomon or you look at King David, Abraham, there are a lot of people in the Old Testament that had more wives. And when you look at even outside of the religious books culturally in Europe, in Africa, Asia, everywhere, there were men with several wives for several reasons. So I thought to myself, well, there cannot be a reason either. So one by one, all these reasons fell. In the end, I thought, well, I have to say all of them are not prophets. But I didn't believe that. Because I thought, well, the things they did. They said, the miracles that happened. They were confirmed in what they said and what they did. so they are. And then I said, well, then I have to accept that. Prophet Muhammad, perhaps, is a prophet too, so I was doubting it. So first I thought, well, it's the most evil person I know because of the history. Then I said, well, perhaps it's not that evil. But he's not a prophet. And in the end, I start doubting. Perhaps he is a prophet. Yeah. That took, of course, me reading a lot of books again. And the one thing that I think was very wise of Abdul Hakim Murad to say was, he said, well, the books you read about with the anti-Islam arguments are written by non-Muslims, he said. If you want to know more about Christianity, you don't read books from atheists. You start reading the books from the Christians. Why do they believe this? What are the arguments? So that you have to do the same with Islam. So start reading Islamic books from Islamic teachers, from Islamic scholars, etc. And then you can see if you compare the books on the same topic of people who are Muslim and wrote those books, and non-Muslim you can see where they took the wrong turn, where they translated the words in the wrong way. Sometimes perhaps even not on purpose, but just because they didn't know where things are added, where things were left out of it. So in the end, you see, there is this other religion almost created because of all these things. And that's what I did. And that's what I also did with the life of the prophet. Because I read a book from Martin Lings, The Life of the Prophet, based on the earliest source of Prophet Muhammad. And it was written, of course, by a convert and his way of reasoning. His way of telling has a way of writing that appealed to me because it's culturally the same thing. How do I approach a certain topic? And it was the first time that I saw him not so much as a warlord, because that's the picture I had in my mind. But I saw him as a father, and I saw him as a friend and a teacher and so much more. And so, yeah, I saw the person in his character. And I said, well, I can say a lot, but I cannot say that this is not a good man, so his character persuaded me to read more, and to want to know more, and to want to know more. The story about Hind, may God be pleased with her. There was something that, like a switch. There was something that, like a switch, like I had to change. And it was because I thought, Hind. May God be pleased with her, she was the wife of one of the enemies, Abu Sufyan. And in a way, she gave money to kill Hamza. May God be pleased with him, the favorite uncle of the prophet. And that was what happened on the battlefield. He got killed. They even paraded with his ears and cut off his nose and horrible stuff. So the prophet was deeply sad, of course, of what happened. And years later, he came powerful. He came in power in Mecca. And then there was Hind. May God be pleased with her. And I was reading this book, and I thought, okay, now she gets crucified, or her hands get cut off, or something like that. But he says, well, I cannot look at her right now, but everybody is forgiven. And if you want to stay here and live among the Muslims, it's possible. If you don't want that, you can go. But bloodshedding is over now. And I thought to myself that she was forgiven. If you can forgive someone who kills a relative, especially a favorite uncle, if she even starts parading with parts of his body to show other people that she humiliates you and whatever you stand for, that means you have such a great character. It's very special. It's something you don't see. And that's what he did. So I thought to myself, well, it was a really special guy. And when I saw that, I thought, well, I have these arguments for him being a prophet. I see his character. I see the way he treated other people. I see how he treated his enemies. I think he is a prophet. But then I thought to myself, whoa, that's horrible. Because I already accept that this oneness of God. And now I say, he is a prophet. If I tell you there is only one God and Prophet Muhammad is his prophet, it's almost shahada. So I thought to myself, okay, let's close the books. Stop. This is going in the wrong direction. And of course, I wasn't that anti-Islam anymore because of what I read, or what I saw and what I experienced. What I tell you now, it sounds a little like a fairy tale, but it really happened. In the end, there were all these books at the table, and when I had this feeling of, yeah, okay, this is shahada in a way, I said, well, I put all the books away, and I put the books on the high shelf. But there were so many books that a lot of books fell off the shelf. And one of the books that fell off the shelf was the Quran. And when I picked it up, my hand was on a page which is Surah 22, Ayah 46, and it says, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And I thought to myself, that really is my problem, because it wasn't the eyes. I really could see what I had written down myself. Nobody forced me to write this book. Nobody said you have to write this or that. I started writing myself, and I could see it with my own eyes. But I still couldn't accept the fact that I said, he is a prophet. There is this one God. I just couldn't. So it wasn't my eyes that were blind. It was really my heart. I couldn't accept it. I think my nafs, or whatever, my ego, I couldn't accept it. And I said, well, God, I don't care if it's the God from the Bible or the Quran. Give me a sign or something so that I 100% sure know this is the way. And I went to bed. But when I woke up, I felt very secure in myself. I really felt very secure. I've never been more secure about anything else. The whole anxiety or whole doubting issue disappeared like snow for the sun. And I said to myself, well, I think I'm a Muslim. Well, and then of course, I had to tell other people. Most of them were very negative, of course, for a lot of people, especially some uncles and aunts in the nation. It was kind of a shock. They heard it when it was on the news. And I told my mother. And my mother started crying. And my wife was pretty open. Yeah, she was very cool about it. She said, well, Islam is what you really believe, and that's in your heart. Who am I? And some people from my old work were really aggressive. I got over 2,000 death threats from people who used to support me. People who voted for me. People said the most horrible things. We will rape your wife. Shoot you. We know where your children go to school. Stuff like that. And most of them, of course, are nonsense because they're crazy people writing things on a computer. So it was kind of a hectic time. And I had to tell my work, of course. And it was this Christian organization. So to say to the leader, he said, you can't believe it. And he said, well, I noticed this change when you talked about certain topics on radio. You were kind of a little more mild, not so harsh anymore. But you becoming a Muslim? And after I said, yeah, I became Muslim, he said, I couldn't sleep for 2 days. I couldn't accept it. It was so strange. But the hardest part for me was telling my grandfather. Because my grandfather was dying. And my mother told me, you have to tell your grandfather who was his father. So I said, well, then you have to come with me. She's like a shield. And I just said, "Well, grandfather." I became Muslim, and then he closed his eyes, and I thought he stopped breathing because he was so old. And he really stopped breathing for a while. And then he started breathing again. And he looked at me and said, "Well, at least you didn't become Catholic, so it's very funny." The last thing. And my old boss from the radio, he said, "Well, how do we know that you're not becoming a Hindu one day or something else?" And I told him, "Well, I never chose a religion one time. It was when I became a Muslim. Before that, I didn't choose my religion. I was born in a Christian family. I was raised in a Christian way. And I'm very grateful for all the good things that it brought me. But it was not my decision. And the only time I made a decision was me becoming a Muslim. And it was the most, like I said, I think the most important decision I made. And it was the most rational decision I made. I never took years and years to decide one thing, only becoming a Muslim. It's of course a beautiful moment, but very strange as well. Because as a Christian, you're not used to pray like that. You pray with your hands together and perhaps on your knees. But I think it's very beautiful that you really prostrate. So you really bow down in the deepest way for your Lord. So that's a very humbling, beautiful thing, I think. And that's, it made me feel very happy.
Well, becoming a Muslim, of course, was a big challenge because I had to tell the world, family.
And that was a big challenge.
The part of thinking that it would be very hard to become a Muslim.
Especially as a Protestant Christian, there aren't so many things you have to do in a religious sense.
As a Muslim, in terms of practice, it is required to pray 5 times a day.
It's required to think in a certain way.
You have to be the best in a way every moment because of the relation with your Creator. And because of the fact that you have to pray 5 times a day, it's a constant reminder in a way of the Creator.
So that makes you much more aware of the fact that you have a Lord than as a Christian. That's how I experienced it.